Hey guys, welcome to episode 317 of Stand Up with Pete Dominic Daily. Joining me on the program today, activist and comedian, co-creator of The Daily Show, Lizz Winstead. And here to give an update on teachers and educators and everything that they are dealing with as a result of COVID, the president of the biggest professional union in Florida, my good friend, Andrew Spar, will join me. And I've got the answer to lose those last 10 pesky pounds coming up. I'm Pete Dominic. Time to stand up with me right now. Hello, friends, and thank you very much for joining me on today's episode of Stand Up Daily. I don't actually have any secrets about losing those last 10 pounds. It was just a tease to keep you listening. But I will say this, it's more about what you eat than your exercise. And doing ab work doesn't actually give you a six-pack. And I'm happy, very happy to have you here. And yesterday was a really good day for me just because it was beautiful out. And even though it was Monday, I was feeling good, and I was feeling good about my work. And, you know, every day, I don't know about you, but I think about my own little universe. I think about the people closest to me and how they are doing. My daughters, my wife, my parents, and my brother, generally, my core. And then I move on to other people and friends in my life. And then I move on to the world. And I think I probably do that unknowingly, unwittingly, unconsciously, on a regular basis. And I'm affected by the energy of and the mood and the spirit of all of the people closest to me. I'm sure I am not unique. I'm sure you are similar in many ways. So I'm trying to understand why today felt so blah. It was, again, a beautiful day. Work is going good. Everybody in the core group is feeling good. And I still haven't identified it, but I'm thinking maybe it was the shooting in Colorado. I don't know. I've gotten a couple arguments on Twitter with people about guns, and that usually doesn't bother me at all. I actually enjoy it. People think it's weird and sick and unhealthy. Maybe not. Maybe it is, but I usually enjoy it. But I also got in an argument on Twitter with somebody who was citing a study that said masks don't work to prevent COVID, which, of course, the authors of the study themselves said is not true, and the article got it wrong. But just sometimes dealing with people who just aren't that curious and who are so biased, and it can be frustrating. It can be frustrating, and I don't know if that was what brought me down today, but just wasn't feeling it today. And I do want to talk about what happened in Colorado, and that's mostly what I'm going to hit here in the opening news segment, for which I do every day here on the podcast. I can't do it without you, though. So please, if you haven't signed up for a paid subscription, gotta have it. Gotta be able to sustain this podcast, and I need you to sign up. So if you like it, if you enjoy what I'm doing, booking, hosting, editing, posting, promoting this podcast every day of the week, then please consider supporting it or upping your subscription. Go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic, or just head to the paid subscription link in the show notes. Okay, where to start? Well, I feel like it's important to mention, I feel like everybody who's got any kind of following on social media or is in media, you know, you play some of the same hits or you say some of the same things when a broken record, none of which is doing justice to the massacre in Colorado or Atlanta happens. You got things that you say, and my thing to remind people after every gun crime is, well, number one, most people are good and not violent. At number two, I think even most gun owners are nonviolent. I think that's important to mention and to say. But so often, after these horrible massacres, people just get so dejected and depressed because they say nothing ever changes. Are you one of those people? If so, you're wrong. And you're doing an injustice to the activists and to the victims' families, survivors of gun violence. Because guess what? At the state level, hundreds of laws have been passed because of activists and organizers like Moms Demand and Guns Down and the Brady Gun Control Group and so many other local groups and individual activists and legislators and policymakers. And so let's not do that. There is change. There are good things happening, and you cannot end gun violence. It's a catchy thing to say. You're not going to end it. Not America, where, by the way, we sold, I think, more guns in 2020 as a result of Trump and the pandemic and whatever else you want to attribute it to than almost any other year before. There are hundreds of millions of guns. They say there are more guns than there are people. You can't end the gun violence, but you can limit it. And there are things, I hate the phrase, but common sense things that I think are effective that you can do. This is a uniquely American problem, And so we need a uniquely American solution. All right, let me look back at yesterday's news, mostly talking here about the shooting and the aftermath, the conversation, the policies, what can be done. Here now, the last 24. First, let's hear the president of the United States. He's a pretty good consoler-in-chief, the way his former president, his former boss, Barack Obama, was after these horrible situations, especially because he himself has lived through horrific, unimaginable loss. Here's Joe Biden today.
10 lives have been lost, and more families have been shattered by gun violence in the state of Colorado. And Jill and I are devastated, and the feeling, I just can't imagine how the families are feeling, the victims whose futures were stolen from them, from their families, from their loved ones, who now have to struggle to go on and try to make sense of what's happened.
President Biden also urged action on gun control, something he campaigned very passionately on when he was running for president.
I don't need to wait another minute, let alone an hour, to take common sense steps that will save the lives in the future, and to urge my colleagues in the House and Senate to act. We can ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines in this country.
Not something you would have heard a president say, I think, a couple of cycles ago, because in 1994, when they passed the assault weapons ban, the conventional wisdom amongst Democrats was that a lot of people lost their seats and their House majority because of the vote on that law. There's an argument to whether or not that's true, by the way. I've heard it both sides. Investigators in Boulder, Colorado, which is one of the greatest towns in America, by the way, had a press conference, and one of the chief investigators, I didn't get his name, but this is what he had to say about the gunman's motivation.
Why did this happen? We don't have the answer to that yet, and the investigation is in the very early stages, and the investigators are working hard to determine that.
They do, of course, have a suspect in custody. I won't say his name, but he apparently is Syrian-born. Looks like a white guy, like a lot of Syrians do. I'm Syrian. Well, actually Lebanese, my dad. But my dad's dad and my dad's uncle are from that same country. They looked pretty darn white to me growing up. Anyway, everybody's dunking on each other on social media, saying, see, everybody said he was white, and that's why the police treated him so well, but he's actually a Muslim. Well, he's still white. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's not the most important issue, I think, in terms of how the police handled it. I mean, we can talk about it. It's part of it. He killed 10 people, of course, including a police officer. And here is the chief of police in Boulder, Colorado. Her name is Maris Harold, and she is here talking about Officer Eric Talley, who was killed in the shooting.
This officer had 7 children, ages 5 to 18. I just had that officer's whole family in my office 2 weeks ago to give him an award. I can tell you that he's a very kind man, and he didn't have to go into policing. He had a profession before this, but he felt a higher calling.
Oh, just brutal. 7 kids. I mean, why don't the people who say they support law enforcement want to make it harder for violent people to get guns and the high-capacity magazines that are used to kill cops? Eric Talley had 7 kids. Republicans in Colorado could have prevented him from getting that weapon. I guess the saddest or most depressing thing that people are saying, here's Cory Booker on Twitter, a return to normalcy cannot mean a return to mass shooting after mass shooting. We have the power to stop this. But do they? Do Democratic senators have the power to stop this without getting rid of the filibuster? And even if they do, will they have the votes of people like Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin? Here's some analysis, I think good analysis from Eugene Robinson, who was on MSNBC yesterday, Washington Post columnist, about the reality of the politics, which is sadly the most important part here to get anything done.
It would be hard for him not to take it up. On the other hand, does this become yet another thing, a big thing that Joe Biden could get done if it weren't for that pesky filibuster? Right, because he's going to run into, if he does take this on, and frankly, it's hard for me to imagine him actually prioritizing gun reform, gun safety ahead of the big infrastructure build back better climate push, which was kind of next on the agenda, and then talking up to $3 trillion. That's a pretty heavy lift, but however he prioritizes it, he's going to run into the reality of the U.S. Senate. And the reality is that he can get all kinds of gun safety reforms through the House, but it's unclear to me what, if anything, he can get through the Senate if he needs 60 votes.
One of my favorite senators is Chris Murphy. He is probably the leader for gun control in the U.S. Senate. He came to power, got elected as a senator after the horrific Newtown shooting, I think. And yesterday, the Judiciary Committee in the Senate held a hearing on gun violence. Chris Murphy said the two most significant drops in rates of American gun violence in the last 100 years came immediately following the two most significant gun law reforms passed by Congress. That's not a coincidence. He said, now is the time to make our stand. Today, our movement is stronger than the gun lobby. They are weak. We are potent. Finally, a president and a Congress that supports gun reform. No more Newtowns, no more Parklands, no more Boulders. Now we must take our stand. But you know who else is on that Senate Judiciary hearing? The spawn of the devil himself, or he might actually be the devil. It's hard to tell. Here he is.
And every time there's a shooting, we play this ridiculous theater where this committee gets together and proposes a bunch of laws that would do nothing to stop these murders. Senator from Connecticut just said the folks on the other side of the aisle have no solutions. Well, the senator from Connecticut knows that is false. And he knows that's false because Senator Grassley and I together introduced legislation, Grassley Cruz, targeted at violent criminals, targeted at felons, targeted at fugitives, targeted at those with serious mental disease, to stop them from getting firearms, to put them in prison when they try to illegally buy guns. What happens in this committee after every mass shooting is Democrats propose taking away guns from law-abiding citizens because that's their political objective. But what they propose, not only does it not reduce crime, it makes it worse.
Hail Hydra! Okay, that was me saying that. That wasn't Ted Cruz saying Hail Hydra, but I bet he thought it. What a creep. And everything he just said was complete and utter bullshit. Here's a call to action that if you want to do something, this is from Moms Demand and everytown.org. This is, I'm just going to give you the audio of a pretty slick video that they put out with a call to action.
Yesterday's tragic shooting in Parkland, Charleston, Orlando. I'd like to start this morning with a word about yesterday's tragic shooting in Parkland, Charleston, Orlando. I, along with all members of the Senate, will keep the victims and their families in our prayers.
My thoughts and prayers will go out to all of the victims, their families, and the entire community.
Offering our prayers and our thoughts.
There's a whole lot of mourning and a lot of grief and a lot of broken hearts.
My heart, my thoughts, my prayers.
And of course, we are thinking and praying today.
I stand for freedom.
Thoughts and prayers. Protect
That will lift the victims and their families.
Elected leaders owe us more than thoughts and prayers to prevent gun violence. They owe us action. Tell your senators to take action on background checks now. Text checks to 644-33. Damn, I almost nailed it, but I barbled the word text. Text checks to 644-33 to demand your senators take action on background checks now. I want to play this for you. This is a guy named Tom Sullivan. He is a postal worker, an Air Force veteran, and sadly, a victim of gun violence. His son, Alex, was 27. He was celebrating his birthday with friends and coworkers at the theater in Aurora, Colorado, when he was murdered, one of 12 who was murdered that night, July 20th, 2012. And this is what he had to say.
Those people are going to do the same thing that I did this morning. They're going to start looking through their closets and their drawers and looking for something that they can hold on to because they had no idea that sending somebody to the grocery store was going to end up the way that it did. I just remind all of you that you're affected. You are a victim and a survivor of this crisis that we live in that continues to affect the people here within the state of Colorado. Please take care of yourself. Reach out to those that you know and trust and care about. because they're the ones who understand you. Be careful of what you hear and what others will say. Trust those that you know. And we'll just keep trying to get through the day. Thank you.
All right, I will be talking tomorrow to Chris Brown, who is the president of BradyUnited.org, which is a gun control organization. And we'll be talking more, and I would love to hear from you. I'm sure we'll talk about it on Thursday night at our hangout as well. But now, here is a couple of more news stories for the last 24, including the news about the AstraZeneca vaccine. AstraZeneca is being accused of cherry-picking information data. Apparently, they may have included outdated information and touting the effectiveness of their vaccine against COVID-19. Now, this vaccine is not yet out, available. You don't have it. Nobody's been given this vaccine, but I think it's an important story. But here is the report from MSNBC. My friend Ayman Moyadeen, here he is about a minute, and you hear Anthony Fauci on this as well.
At this hour, health officials are questioning results from AstraZeneca's U.S. trial, saying it may have included outdated information, potentially giving an incomplete view of its efficacy data. AstraZeneca maintains the results were consistent, saying they will immediately reach out to the Data Safety Monitoring Board and issue a primary analysis within 48 hours. Dr. Anthony Fauci says that while AstraZeneca's vaccine has good data behind it, he acknowledges this issue will likely sow doubt.
This is really what you call an unforced error, because the fact is, this is very likely a very good vaccine. And this kind of thing does, as you say, do nothing but really cast some doubt about the vaccines and maybe contribute to the hesitancy. It was not necessary. If you look at it, the data really are quite good, but when they put it into the press release, it wasn't completely accurate.
I think Anthony Fauci, Dr. Fauci, is being diplomatic there. This is apparently a pretty big debacle. Okay, moving on. Here now is senator and pilot fish to anything that is more powerful from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, saying shit on Fox News.
Custom agents who are dealing with the Biden administration shit show at the border.
Remember how that was like a 3 or 4 day story? It was all everybody was talking about, what's happening at the border. And then a guy went into a grocery store and murdered 10 people in Boulder, Colorado, kind of got bumped out of the way. They're bringing it back on Fox News last night. And oh, my gosh, they came hard against everything. Democrats, guns. It was real. Speaking of shit show, the 7, 8, 9, 10 hours. The opinion hours on Fox News last night were terrifying from what I saw. Okay, the other day when I asked on the air what you thought of the opening news segment, if you liked it, if you wanted more, if you wanted less, I got so much great feedback. But some of you said, you know what, Pete, just don't make it too long if you don't have to. Don't force it if there's not more there. And I feel like that's the case right now. There's a lot more, but I want to get to the news dump and share with you my interviews with Lizz Winstead and Andrew Spar for today. So shall we get to the news dump? It's not COVID. It's not political. It's undercovered and always interesting.
Trotting desert camel sitting on its hump. If I die of thirst, I'm on today's news dump.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God, that camel's terrifying. It sounds like a tauntaun from Empire Strikes Back. Is that what they based it on? Well done, boys. Pico, Dan McDonald, thank you very much. Hey, look at this news. Boston has a new mayor, and she is a first on two fronts. Her name is Kim Janey, and she is the first woman and first black person to hold the office. Of course, she replaced Marty Walsh, who is now Joe Biden's Secretary of Labor, former Boston City Council president, who stepped into the role of acting mayor. She's scheduled to have a ceremonial glass ceiling swearing in on Wednesday. And the old white people of Boston are desperately searching for her birth certificate. They're racist. A 31-year-old man died after leaping off a condominium complex in Panama City Beach. I wouldn't have mentioned this if it were suicide, but he was a base jumper, and he jumped off a tourist high-rise And apparently his parachute didn't open. Still no cause of death, but I think it's because he jumped off a building and his parachute didn't open. Well, that would be a pretty horrible thing to see while you're on vacation. All right, here's a story to take your mind off that. That's not so bad. Apparently, Krispy Kreme is going to give 1 donut per day to those who have had a dose of the vaccine. Krispy Kreme announced that anyone who shows a valid COVID-19 vaccination card can receive 1 free original glazed donut. And vaccinated customers can come back every day this year for another donut, apparently. Well, I don't quite get that, and I try not to eat donuts, even though they're delicious. But I thought that would be a good story to read next. Anything any company can do to incentivize people to get vaccinated is fine by me. Well, the full jury has been seated in the murder trial of Derek Chauvin, the white former Minneapolis police officer charged with the death of 46-year-old black man George Floyd during a May 2020 arrest that ignited protest nationwide. The panel of 12 jurors and 3 alternates was finalized on Tuesday morning after defense attorneys, prosecutors, and the judge presiding over the case in Minneapolis spent 11 days questioning a pool of potential jurors on everything from their thoughts about racial inequalities, the justice system, the Black Lives Matter movement, and whether they had formed any preconceived opinion about Chauvin's guilt or innocence. 9 jurors who self-identify as white, 6 who self-identify as people of color, including 4 who self-identify as black. This is going to be big, folks. Opening statements, which will be televised, apparently, on Court TV, are scheduled for March 29th. It will last about 4 weeks and include nearly 400 witnesses. Get ready. And oh my goodness, a Tennessee man was able to turn his luck around after finding his missing $1 million winning ticket in a parking lot where he dropped it, apparently, on a blustery afternoon. Nick Slatton learned on March 11th that he'd won a drawing with all matching numbers on a ticket worth over $1 million. And then he lost the ticket. He lost it. He was able to retrieve the ticket, which somehow didn't get blown away, and claim his prize. With the winnings, he told the lottery he and his fiancée plan to continue working, upgrade their cars, buy a house of their own, make some investments, and hopefully live without a whole lot of worries. $1 million. Guess that'll do it for him. Cool. I just wish I could find my AirPods. I lose everything. All right, that is your news dump. Thank you very much for all of your feedback on the news. Let me know what you're thinking, what to submit. Every day people send me stuff that I should throw in there, but I can't get enough. So tweet me at Pete Dominic or email me standupwithpete@gmail.com. Always want to hear from you. All right. I got 2 excellent guests joining me today. Coming up, the president of the biggest professional union in Florida, which is a, quote, right-to-work state, or as we call it, a right-to-work-for-less state. Very hostile to organized labor, anti-union in Florida. The governor there is a horrible monster and a creep, DeSantis. And I had a great conversation with my friend Andrew Spar, who's the president of the Florida Education Association, a teacher and just a brilliant, passionate guy, and I really want you to listen to that interview. Coming up right now, it's the co-creator of The Daily Show, stand-up comedian, writer, and activist who focuses on women's reproductive rights. She wrote an amazing book, a memoir, a few years ago, which included a heart-wrenching story about her own abortion called Liz Free or Die. Go to Abortion Access Front, aafront.org, and on Thursday night, you should join her if you are a fan of the movie Dirty Dancing. She's doing like a Mystery Science Theater with a bunch of comedians, and to do a Dirty Dancing riff-a-thon. We talk about it at the end of our interview. Here now, ladies and gentlemen, my good friend, who just got out of the hospital, and she'll tell you why, the great, on Twitter, at Lizz Winstead. Yay! It's Lizz Winstead Day. It's the day that I look forward to when I find out that it's happening. How's that? I knew we were doing this. I was looking forward to it. I'm very excited to see you. How are you? You had surgery. Are you okay?
I'm okay. I had surgery. I had a trash-ass gallbladder that decided to fail me. And then I find out that all gallbladders are trash-ass, and they don't really do anything except if they decide to act up, then they wreak havoc on your body. So it's sort of like having this shitty roommate who's been living on your couch and not paying rent, who's just been sitting there. And then all of a sudden they fall asleep smoking on your couch. and then your couch is on fire, and you're like, you were useless, and now you just are wrecking everything.
And you yell at your roommate, you're like a gallbladder.
Yes. It's like we've all had that experience, but that was my physical body experience, was that crappy ass room person who was going to move in for a couple of days.
What?
And then never left.
What is it? How did you know you had a gallbladder problem, and what does it mean to your body and your life to no longer have a gallbladder?
So your gallbladder is basically stores extra bile for you in case your body doesn't make the bile and break down the foods in your stomach. It will be like, oh, I got you, since you're forgot to do that or you're busted. But if you don't need it, it can collect sludge, have that bile just sit there. It's useless. And then you get stones. So what happens is, and this is the part that is trash, it's, you tell me what these things are. You get a massive pain in your chest. You break out into a sweat. The back of your shoulders start to hurt. You become dehydrated and you have shortness of breath. So I'm like, am I having a heart attack? I think I'm having a heart attack. So it mirrors that. And so smaller versions of that, you don't even realize you're having these smaller attacks. It feels like indigestion when it's not a big one, or it feels like you're dehydrated. So I'm like, oh, maybe I shouldn't eat all that Indian food for breakfast. And then when it becomes a big one, you literally are crippled over and feel like you're dying. So I went into the emergency room and I said, I think I'm having a heart attack. I have heart disease in my family. And they're like, right this way. If you say I think I'm having a heart attack and you have white hair, they pretty much get you in and hooked you up and rule out that you're having a heart attack instantly. But the doctor came in and he was like, tell me about it. And then I told him how I was feeling. And then he literally went in and he just touched me, which is right under my right breast is kind of where your gallbladder is, in that area. And he just touched it and I went through the roof. And he's like, all right, it's your gallbladder, pain meds for you. Gave me an ultrasound. They take it out laparoscopically. And I felt great in 24 hours.
And without it?
Without it, nothing. You're fine. It's kind of like useless attic that's full of mold. You're not going to.
Do you lose weight? How heavy of an organ is it? Did you go in?
You know what?
Can you imagine? Because
what kind of societal body image bullshit are you playing into right now?
I will tell you.
And also, what are you saying to me?
I'm saying I've dug myself a hole.
For you. Hopefully, you'll get back to a weight that is becoming of you.
Well, how extreme of a disorder could you get before you do start, removing bones and organs for weight loss? That would be pretty bad, I think. You'd have to fake a lot of things. Oh, you're showing me now pictures of the surgery. It's wow.
Here's my gallbladder.
Oh, very. That's.
I can never tell an unhealthy organ from a healthy organ whenever they show me. Like when that fraud Dr. Oz would go on Oprah. I never understood. He's like, here's a bad pile of stuff that came out of a body, and here's a healthy liver. I'm like, this all looks like stuff you feed to pigs. I don't know.
That's how I feel when he is in a photo next to another doctor. Here's a bad doctor.
Yes. And why is he hosting Jeopardy? I'm so enraged. I am the massive Jeopardy fan. It is literally how my right-wing father and I would communicate and not kill each other, is by watching Jeopardy together, because we couldn't deny each other was smart and knew things. So when you watch Jeopardy and you're answering questions, it's a really good way to talk to people from the opposite side. It's like, oh, you know what? You're smart. I don't understand how you got to this place in your political life that you would think this is a good idea, but I still can't say you're dumb because I just watched you run the hodgepodge category.
That's an interesting analysis and a great bridge for anybody with a troubled relationship with someone they love.
100%.
But do you have a preference?
I feel, honestly, this is so hilarious, this interview. So here's something to tell everyone, all your listeners, super good piece of advice that my doctor did not emphasize to me. First of all, I've never had surgery. I've had my teeth pulled. I've had an abortion. That is what I've had.
Oh, wow.
Well, yeah. So I've never been put out, and I've never had laparoscopic surgery. And so in laparoscopic surgery, what they do is a camera goes through your belly button, and then they put incisions in you, and they blow air into your body. So they blow up your insides, and then they extract the organ. It's how they do hysterectomies. It's how they do a lot of stuff, right? So then you're done and they seal you up, but they leave all that air in there. And so you have air pockets that land all over your body and cause incredible pain. Ooh. So like it wasn't the incision part that's tender, but it's this massive amount of air that is like on your shoulders and all this stuff. So you're burping and farting and you got to walk around because you got to get rid of the air that's been trapped in your body. It's nuts. And it really hurts. So just know that if you have laparoscopic surgery, ask your doctor about the trapped air and how you need to, like, that's why you got to get up and walk. It's why, like, all of the belching and the expelling of the thing, but you got to move.
Can you just have someone like press on you in different and then the air comes out like a cartoon?
Well, it a little bit felt like that because like it really landed in my shoulders. So I was pressing on my own self and it would feel better. And I went for a walk and then it was like it's very bizarre. We have talked, this has been the funnest so far we've ever talked because we haven't like gotten into the down and dirty, but like, yeah. So, but if anybody says you got a bad gallbladder and take it out because it doesn't really do anything for you and can just like irritate your insides. And when it's gone, you feel better. Like I do feel a lot better.
On the next episode of Liz and Pete, we'll talk about the spleen. Is it necessary? All right.
I know.
Well,
I'm still more credible than Dr. Oz. Everything I just said is like literally real. And I'm not going to try to sell you hydrochloroquine or any kind of other crackpot vitamins that don't work, by the way. I just told you to fart after your surgery. That's not exactly big here.
So now I feel bad because you said it was the best and we haven't even gotten into the down and dirty, but now I want to get into the down and dirty and talk about.
No, of course, but it's like nice to just like.
Yeah.
I didn't even say how are you. I just launched into my own narcissism.
That's how we go, and I'm glad you talked about that openly. I think it's important. It's helpful when people talk about their surgeries openly. You don't want people to become hypochondriacs, but you also don't want them to think that, as you did, you're having a heart attack when it's not that serious because, so I just think it's helpful when people are more transparent about their health. It's interesting now at 45 I'm trying really hard to get other men to tell me what's going on with them, especially if they're a little older than me. Like, dude, don't hold back. I might have happened what you had happen. Please stop being prideful and tell me what's going on with your butt or whatever.
Also, if your dick doesn't work, there's a lot of ways to fix it that doesn't have anything to do with just your dick not working. So, like, go get your body checked out so you can get that shit fixed.
You went there, so let's pounce off of it.
I mean, honestly, it's
no
so
doubt.
shameful and crazy, but like, talk about it because so much of it can be stress. It can be emotional, whatever. It can be like something that's happening in another part of your body that you would not associate with like dysfunction.
Yep.
That kind of thing. So totally. Also, gallbladder happens mostly in women and it's also hereditary. So it's not always just like, oh, I eat well, I'm going to be fine. It's like, nah, sometimes you're going to be trash.
Well, speaking of dicks,
where do you want to go?
Well, you were tweeting just before your surgery. You had heard about the news last week of the shooting in Atlanta, and you were tweeting about that. And I wanted to ask you about this idea. I wanted to talk with you a little bit about the idea of like the incel and men being so mad at women and blaming women for any number of things, but specifically that they're not getting laid, that they're not having sex, that they're not in a relationship. And I, that word seems new over the past, whatever it's been, 5 years, incel. But I'm sure there's always been that kind of anger directed towards women. But maybe it has something to do with social media or some societal or cultural change. But I did want to get into that a little bit with you in terms of, we don't know about that shooting necessarily, the motives, and we may not forever, and we can speculate, and I'm fine with that. But in general, obviously, this is a horrible situation that we keep seeing over and over. It's always men. They're always angry, and they have access to guns. But I wanted to ask you first just about that idea, that anger, and why, and what kind of a poison it's become on American culture.
Well, it's in the halls of education. You have Jordan Peterson, who is teaching, these larger scopes on how feminism, because of the nature of feminism and because of the roles that women are demanding in society and them wanting more and having more desires and being more selective, that they are the ones who are participating in emasculating men and creating a man who doesn't know his role, and therefore, having non-monogamy means that men are frustrated and take out their frustrations. I mean, that cop used the phrase, the guy was having a bad day, he was frustrated, he was at his wit's end. And it's like, if we are at a point where there is one person who normalizes the concept that dude has extreme messed up bullshit around his own sexuality and relationship to sex and relationship to women or lack of relationship to women, and we are in any point holding women accountable for men's lack of getting what they want or feel they deserve in any kind of sexual setting, then I got to check out of this fucking world, because that is the most disgusting thing that we can do. And again, it's as we examine things constantly, whether it's race, gender, all of it, it's not on women to say that is not true. It is on other men to say, whoa, 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 we cannot further that. That is some garbage. That is bullshit. Him saying, I have a sex addiction and therefore I needed to destroy places where sex was available. If we all were out destroying the things that we succumb to because of our desires, we would be living right now in some kind of like post-apocalyptic hellscape where there would be no McDonald's and there would be no pet stores.
I'm trying to think of what thing that really controls me.
Right. Think about what rules you to the point of, I think I'm going to use that as my justifiable homicide defense. I mean, and men have been pawning off this shit forever. Let's not forget how Harvey Milk died. Dan White in San Francisco, Harvey Milk was the mayor of San Francisco. Dan White claimed the Twinkie defense, said that, too many Twinkies made him go nutbaggy. He wasn't a homophobe, of course. But he had too many Twinkies, and the sugar buzz and the preservatives around Twinkies caused him to murder the mayor of San Francisco. And it's like, and it was like that was even brought in to the defense. I'm in Minneapolis right now, and they're doing jury selection for the trial of Derek Chauvin.
That's right.
And Derek Chauvin's attorney wants to bring up some drug charge that George Floyd was brought on a year ago. Why would that be? Why would that have any germanity to a case about a cop who strangled someone on their neck for 8 minutes and 37 seconds?
Well, I would argue that nothing in George Floyd's past, nothing he did, even if he was a brutal murderer. Yeah, wouldn't.
The day before. I don't care. Go back. What happened to George Floyd in that moment? What he did 5 minutes before that was walk out of a store.
Well, you can't actually, whether it's in war or in law enforcement, if someone commits horrible violence and then you have them in handcuffs or you have them under it, you can't hurt them. You're not allowed. No. It doesn't matter how angry anybody is. This guy that walked into the shopping center, the King Soopers in Boulder, once you have him in cuffs, you can't hurt him. It's the law. It might not be your ethics, but it is the law. So
and they sure didn't. They walked him out, didn't they?
They brought him to a Red Lobster, as a matter of fact, in Boulder.
Because,
I don't know. What about the gun part, though? I mean, we've been talking about this forever, and the thing that is most fascinating about these two high-profile shootings in Atlanta and then in Boulder, it sounds like both people, maybe I'm wrong about the Boulder gun, I don't know any, but the guy in Atlanta bought a gun the day he used it. And the other thing is, so many of these shootings are with the same exact gun, and you've now got a Congress that could potentially get something done if they get rid of the filibuster. But in the end, there is no policy solution that will solve all gun violence, but there are policy solutions that will decrease a lot of gun violence, I think, according to experts. What are your thoughts on all of that?
Look, death is inevitable. We do things to prevent it and prolong it. Like, I don't know what else to say. If you are going to say this, the answer to curbing something, if it's not going to totally stop it, is to do nothing. Again, why are we giving people that platform? If that is your solution, then you are just trying to create a world where you sit on your couch, maybe invent a couch that flushes, and some kind of machine that will shoot Hot Pockets right into your mouth.
Sounds pretty great.
Your television, and it will turn the channels for you. Because I feel like that is the world you want to have, where you are culpable for nothing. You will just sit and have convenience happen to you. And that is what you are moving towards. Because I'm very sick of, because it's a constant thing, whether it's guns, whether it's our environment, whether it is looking at how we deal with racial bias. If you don't try to do things to improve our world, and it doesn't improve it instantly or perfectly, we don't try to improve. I don't even understand what that means.
Yeah, you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And there's all kinds of policy solutions that could decrease suicides, which is a huge problem with guns, and
violence, and just violence in general.
Yep.
We've lived a year where all of a sudden we were all locked up, and where you were at on the mental hellscape that has been quarantine, trying to educate your kids during it, going even more inward in, like, I don't know about you, but I do have a little bit of like terror about what getting back to normal looks like. Interacting with people. Who am I now? What does that feel like for me? Yet I'm somebody who is pro all the protocols. I just wanted it to be over. For people who are angry about it, already felt like there was a government conspiracy against their freedoms and their liberties and their taking of their guns. We had a lockdown. We didn't see mass shootings because we had a lockdown. There was not a awakening in our society. We just stopped being able to go out and do that. And so now that we're opening back up again, people have a lot of undealt with mental health issues around what we've all gone through. All of the problems that were more readily available pre-pandemic are now just going to reemerge. And now that's what we need to, and that's something that we need to talk about.
For sure. And the other thing that we probably need to talk about is, this is terribly depressing, but because of the pandemic and other circumstances, more guns were sold in the last year than, I remember when it first started, Liz, and we all had no idea what this was. I thought about getting a rifle. My neighbors are crazy and they hate me. And I thought about it for a minute. And there's actually, sadly, a bunch of gun stores where I live, just north of New York City in Rockland County. And there was a line to get in the gun store. There were lines to get into gun stores. The point being, everybody was afraid, and now there are more guns out there during this time. So it is scary to see how we kind of return to normal. I do think it's a little hypocritical for you to say all that, given people can't see this, but you have two crisscross guns in your backdrop. And how do you defend all of what you just said with guns everywhere?
Yeah, you know what? Not all guns. I know. That's hilarious. I like the callback to Lauren Boebert. Pete is lying. I do not. I keep my...
No, you have to improv. I'm sorry.
Pete, we all know that I have a basement full of guns, and I keep them all loaded.
And more. There's Claymore mines down there. It's a real arsenal.
I am making chemtrails down there.
I don't think you can make...
I don't either.
You're bad at conspiracy theories.
I'm really bad. I don't even like pizza.
Let me try to kind of tie all this together with an article that you wrote for the Daily Beast, and because I think I can't stop thinking about and talking about the ins and outs of the insurrection of January 6th and what happened and the investigation and why we need to talk about it and why it happened and why it's important in a way that it happened. For some reasons, because I think we saw something like this coming for a long time, and it seemed like a culmination of sorts. But you wrote a piece for the Daily Beast comparing and contrasting the anti-abortion movement, referred to as the March for Life, to the insurrection? Where are the intersections there? Overlaps?
Well, the March for Life is just one piece of how anti-abortion extremists gather. And so in my work, for your listeners who don't know me, I run a reproductive rights organization, and a big thing that we do is we travel around the country and try to bring communities together with community clinics that are small independent community providers, so that they can have support, people can learn about what they need, and meet the folks who are escorting at the clinics and helping do activism around that state. We've been to 36 states, and we have created a coalition of people who have been monitoring the anti-abortion extremism in all these different states. And 5 years ago, when we started doing this tour, we decided that we were going to create a database and connect people and have a look at where all these extremists were and if there was crossover. And sure enough, some of the extremists that were happening in Ohio or Arkansas were communicating with the ones in Mississippi and Alabama, and they were traveling across state lines, and they were creating these networks of people that were traveling around the country and being really terrorizing abortion clinics in other states, terrorizing the doctors that work there. And so we created we have fake accounts that we have where we years ago have pseudo identities, and we have joined some of these groups, and we have seen how they operate and how they move. And we had followed how they had not only just been anti-abortion extremists, but they had also been, for example, one organization called Operation Save America, their new crowned head, was one of the people who was leading the white supremacy militia in Kenosha, defending Kyle Rittenhouse and defending the stores. We have him he's a minister. We have him holding a service talking about how Christians need to take up arms. And so we have been following these folks for a long time. When January 6th happened, we opened up our fake accounts. We watched, actually before January 6th, we watched people announce they were going to go to DC. Through the course of January 6th happening, we immediately identified 15 anti-abortion extremists who were at the Capitol and reported them to the FBI. And a lot of them got calls and got visited by the FBI. Nice. And so I think we live in a world where, sadly, we are so siloed in our activism. And we've been trying forever to say to folks who are working on voting things and on white supremacy spaces and anti-immigration and LGBTQ folks, these people are the same folks. And a lot of times you might see different leadership in the area that you are in, if you're working on exposing white nationalists, you might see different leadership there. But we're seeing leadership in the anti-abortion movement, following the leadership there and helping organize stuff. So we are really trying to bring and talk to all these different organizations to say, we need to compare notes. We need to understand that this is not new. And as Americans are seeing this insurrection happen and this rise up, that these same folks are the people that we have been trying to defend clinics against for years and been trying to, raise awareness. A guy who blew up a clinic, set a bomb in a clinic, was in jail for it, was making a video in DC on January 6th about, being there. John Brockhoff, he's really scary. Jason Storms, there's people who are on the sidelines promoting it, being very excited about it, and then all of a sudden taking their posts down. But, we have it. And so, we've been trying to raise it from the rooftops, but it's the thing where a lot of folks are like, abortion activists are some of the scariest people. And also when people are like, how is it that, clear thinking Republicans would vote for Trump no matter what? It's because of abortion. They focus on abortion so often as the litmus, getting the judges, trying to end abortion. And that, is driven by racism, classism, all the shit that goes along with all the other stuff,
Sexism.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so it's
would you have that's great that you're doing that kind of work. Would you have submitted those names to the Trump FBI when he was in charge? Like, would you have turned them? I mean, I'm sure there were still people working in the FBI whose job it was to look at that. But did you?
We did. I mean, Trump was still president on January 6th. You know?
Oh, and right. That's right. And that's when
yeah. So,
right.
We turned it in there. And I think, and there's been a rise in anti-abortion extremism and anti-abortion legislation based on watching this. Since the January 6th attacks on the Capitol, clinic violence has escalated profoundly. There has been, just 2 weekends ago, 2 different armed men were outside of clinics, and both of them one guy shot himself, and they didn't disperse the protests. They simply took the gunman to the hospital. And in both cases, the other case where the guy climbed down a ladder in Michigan, which is legal to bring a gun to an abortion clinic in Michigan. He was taken down and nothing happens. Like, this is the thing. And the parallels of law enforcement, there's been cases over the past couple of weeks, actually not over the past couple of weeks, just reported in the past couple of weeks. It's historic, where law enforcement has pulled up and taken part in the protests, grabbed a sign, and stayed with the anti-abortion activists. There has been, in South Bend, Indiana, cops bringing water to the protesters at the clinic there. And so the parallels of how we saw law enforcement fail us, how we've seen law enforcement acquiesce and treat white terrorists different than African Americans who are doing nothing except protesting for their own civil rights. It's you're white gloved, you're sent home. It's really astounding. And we're really trying to raise awareness around folks finding out and realizing that we're all on the same team, and we can't marginalize and continue to expect those of us who work in the abortion rights movement to be quiet, take a seat. Yeah. That's your issue. It's like, it's not our issue. It's everyone's issue, because all of these people are bringing their violence to all these places. Just to give you an idea of 2021 in the landscape of abortion, and this is really kind of telling, 10 states have tried to pass a total ban on abortion. Every single legislator who put forth this total ban has said, because of how Trump has positioned the courts, we feel very emboldened to be able to have clearly unconstitutional laws go through an unqualified lower court system and get to a profoundly conservative, wanting to get rid of abortion Supreme Court.
Yeah.
In the state of Arizona alone, since January, they've proposed 150 pieces of legislation to curb access to abortion. In Arizona alone. Arkansas just tried to pass it. Arkansas, their governor just passed a near total ban on abortion and said, I know this is unconstitutional. The only reason I signed it was because I want the Supreme Court to have cases that they can try to overturn Roe v. Wade with, knowing that it's costing the taxpayers of Arkansas money. Is Arkansas fine? Is COVID good? Are all the stores back open? You guys doing great? You can give extra money to throw at like being some kind of test case for abortion when there's already just one clinic that provides it. And so you're like, South Carolina, same thing. And there's a thread, and this thread is really scary. So feel all the ways you want to feel around abortion. I'm sorry I'm filibustering, but it's like really bad.
Go ahead.
Within this last spate of legislation, there has been a thread and a through line in various different ways, but thematically it's been either allowing the inseminator to have a say in whether or not somebody has an abortion, allowing concerned parties to be able to obstruct a person who's pregnant from having an abortion.
Concerned parties is in quotes, like people that are just not involved. They're not a party.
People who feel like abortion's murder, and so I'm a concerned party, so I want to stop this abortion from happening because you're committing a murder. Mm-hmm. Assigning legal representation to fetuses. South Carolina, the bill that, thank God, didn't make it out of committee, and this part of the bill was taken out. But a legislator proposed that if you got someone pregnant and they said, I don't want to be pregnant, I'm going to have an abortion, you could have carried a gun to protect your fetus.
They gave rights to create armed security for a fetus?
For the person who inseminated yes. So that was stripped out of the legislation that made it out of committee. But the fact that the entitlement of property is there and has been a through line in so much of this legislation, and the fact that it's not on the news anywhere. No one's talking. Have you heard any of this, Pete, except for me right now?
Not at all. That's just one of the reasons why I like to talk to you, whenever we do, because you update me. I mean, it's another good reason to follow all the social media handles for Abortion Access Front, because you guys are always talking about this stuff. But no, I mean, everything gets buried under COVID and politics, and we're starting to see more now getting reported because, Trump's not sucking the wind out of everything. But no.
Except for this, it's the number one proposed legislative thing that's happening in state houses. And it's the least reported story of any issue, period.
Yeah, well, you are seeing so many states that are run by Republicans attacking voting rights and women's reproductive rights, and those are obviously connected as well. I want to ask you about what you and some very funny comedian friends, two of which I know, Morgan Murphy, really well. I love Morgan. Helen Hong is joining you. Guy Branum is joining you. March 25th, 8 p.m., aafront.org. It's the Dirty Dancing Riffathon.
Yeah.
And what is so you watch, before we explain why Dirty Dancing, you've done this before?
We have never done this before.
Okay. So it's like Mystery Science, like you watch a movie and comment about it with people?
That's exactly right.
I never partaked in such a thing.
It's really, really fun. And Dirty Dancing is a film that it's one of the most visceral films of all time, where people are very connected to it. And when I ask people, if you were to explain the plot of Dirty Dancing to me, and these are fans, what do you say it's about? And they're like, well, it's about a young girl who comes of age and goes with her parents to a resort, and she falls in love with one of the workers, and it's a story about class, and it's a story about a lot of things. And yeah, it's that. But the premise of Dirty Dancing is one of the workers at a fancy resort gets pregnant in 1963, has to have an illegal abortion, and somebody needs to train to fill in for her to dance at the other resort so that the guy doesn't lose his job. That is the premise of the movie. So she has an illegal abortion. Jerry Orbach treats her so she doesn't die from it. And then Don't Put Baby in a Corner trains to fill in for her for the dance contest. And you're like, how does that movie get made? But it's an incredible feminist movie with a bunch of really interesting conversations around class and gender. There's a gender reversal where Patrick Swayze is literally, how for years there's been movies where, the powerful man who's the son of the magnate falls in love with the worker girl, and their love can never be recognized because she's not of their ilk. And this is a movie that switches out that completely.
Right.
And all the women are powerful and sexual in it, and the men are trying to figure out who they are. And it's really great. And so we're going to watch it and walk through it. The music's great. It's going to be really fun. And it's a fundraiser for Abortion Access Front, so we can continue our work busting these horrible bad guys, supporting these clinics that are under siege and are continuing to be under siege, and, all the stuff that we do. It's going to be a really fun night, March 25th.
You like the film, if you like laughing, if you want to support women's reproductive rights, then join Liz and Friends March 25th at 8 p.m. aafront.org/DD, and I'll have that link in the show notes for today. All right, well, Minneapolis in spring, Liz, any closing remarks in our conversation today? Anything that we didn't cover that you want to mention?
I just feel like I love coming and talking to you, because you really do care and you really do understand, in the profundity of this crazy world we're all trying to navigate, that you just can't leave out these massive swaths of importance.
I like listening. I've always talking to you because I've always felt like it's more, for me, it's always been more listening to you. I've always felt like you're a big sister, a mentor, you know, in comedy and in activism and women's reproductive rights. And we've always had that relationship. And I've always felt like every time I talk to you, I like to listen. I like to ask you questions. I like to step in a little shit sometimes and learn things and hear your point of view on things. And it's always great. And before we pressed record today, you even redid my studio. So like I do what I'm told by Lizz Winstead.
I mean, I have decorating tips too.
I know, it's good. I like it. You give me nice comment, nice compliments, and then you said lose the plant in the background.
Lose the plant. You're blocking your own promotional materials. What kind of bullshit is that?
I know you got to get back to chemtrails. Thank you very much for joining me. I love you, Liz.
Oh my God. Anytime. Love blabbing with you. And thank you so much for actually taking the time to just
always
having folks listen.
Thank you, Lizz Winstead. There she goes, Lizz Winstead. Check her out and check out the Dirty Dancing Ripathon. It's March 25th at 8 p.m. Her podcast, Feminist Sleeper Cell, drops Fridays at noon. And, of course, go to aafront.org. Watch her comedy special that just came out as well. So much to plug for Lizz Winstead because she's very talented, very passionate. Always love talking to her. Hope you enjoyed that. And now, my next guest for episode 317 is an old friend of mine. We became friends because he was a listener, and he was an educator and a teachers union leader down in Florida. And he reached out to me years ago. We began talking. He invited me down to speak to folks. My mom, of course, is a public school teacher. I'm a huge supporter of public schools as well as organized labor in general. Anyway, Andrew and I have become really good friends over the years. He is a brilliant guy. He's now the president of the Florida Education Association, and they could not have a better leader. Andrew is on Twitter. I'd love for you to say hi to him at Andrew Spar, FEA. And for more on the Florida Education Association's feaweb.org. Here now, my conversation about teaching public schools and what COVID has laid bare with the always brilliant, passionate Andrew Spar. There he is, if only you could see us, these two bald white men's faces. We should do a reality show. Great to see you, Andrew Spar.
It's good seeing you, Pete. How you doing?
I'm doing all right, and I think about you a lot because you are such a great guy who is an educator and who has been an advocate of educators for a long time. And I'm watching teachers, of course, be under fire during COVID. And even if they weren't, just the challenge that it is. And so I wanted to talk with you about a number of things. But before we get to the specifics, I just wanted to ask, remind my audience or myself how you came to this. You're a music teacher. You're a very talented musician, as a matter of fact. You get a scholarship for music. And then you moved to Florida and became a teacher and then an advocate. How did you go from educator to educator advocate?
Yeah, so I started teaching music at a small elementary school in Daytona Beach. And when I was there, one of the things I noticed, it was a school that was a high poverty school, 98% of the kids free and reduced lunch. These are kids who literally live 2 miles away from the ocean, but very rarely get to the beach, if ever. Right. So I'm teaching kids in 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, never seen the ocean. And they literally live 2 miles away from the ocean. And what I started realizing was that our kids are missing out on a lot of things because people making decisions on what should happen in our public schools are not the people working in our public schools. It's not the parents. It's not the teachers. It's not even the students at the high school level who are making these decisions. It's lawmakers who sit literally from me, half a block down the road from where I am right now, and they make decisions. And some of those folks are lawyers. They're not necessarily bad people, but they don't know what it takes to educate children. And so I started getting involved in advocacy for our kids and ultimately for the profession. And one of the things I love about my job, I say this a lot, is I get to advocate and work with people who care about kids, who truly sacrifice so much and have proven it over and over again, especially during COVID, that they will sacrifice so much for kids. They care about kids. They care about the future. You know, people can talk all about how they want to make a difference for the future, but if you're not working with kids who are truly the future and advocating for kids, then are you really focused on the future?
I love that. And I know you so well. And I know that you've actually been doing that actual work for your entire career. And that's how you've become the president of the biggest professional union in Florida, biggest teachers union in Florida. But let me ask you, you grew up in New York. How much different is it? We've talked about this before, and it's fascinating and terrifying and in many ways awful. That's why I'm glad that you're in Florida. How much different is it in New York State, the public schools, the issues, the way that, as you mentioned, lawmakers are making decisions instead of experts and educators than it is in Florida? Because it seems like it's much more challenging for educators in Florida than it is for a state like New York.
Yeah, I would definitely say it's more challenging in Florida, but I will say this, all of our public schools have been facing an assault, really, on the way we educate children for the better part of 20 years. It has really started here in Florida in a lot of respects under then Governor Jeb Bush, but it has expanded and continued to grow in terms of how some of these state legislatures and even at the federal level undermine the work of public educators on a daily basis. And it's this kind of thing. The further you get removed from the classroom, the less you understand what it takes to teach kids and interact with kids on a daily basis and the challenges that people have. So that is a universal challenge across the country right now. The amount of paperwork, the amount of testing, this fixation on high stakes tests and needing to say that that's how we're going to drive decisions around how we educate kids. Now lately there's been this push, hey, we got to talk about social and emotional well-being of our kids. Well, ask any teacher. We've been saying that since the day we started, teaching kids in the world. But we've got to educate the whole child. And when we educate the whole child, we have to know what their needs are. We have to know how they learn. And we have to get away from this fixation that there's a one-size-fits-all approach to this. And so here in Florida, what makes it even more challenging is it's one of the wealthiest states in the nation, yet we're 43rd in the nation in funding per student. We don't invest in our schools, which means we have older school buildings that have challenges in and of themselves. We have old air conditioning units, but we do have air conditioning units. I guess that's a good thing in Florida when it gets real hot. But we have a lot of challenges in recruiting and keeping teachers in the profession and anyone who works in our schools, whether it's bus drivers or paraprofessionals who tend to work with our most neediest students as the teacher assistant in the classroom. Many of them are paid minimum wage. Every time minimum wage goes up in Florida, they get a bump. By the way, minimum wage in Florida is going to be going up because the citizens in the state of Florida, because the legislature wouldn't, passed a constitutional amendment to raise minimum wage to $15 an hour.
Yeah, they do the referendums there, right?
Yeah. We do.
Well, the other, I always want, anytime I'm talking to an educator or especially an education policy expert, which you definitely are, I like to point to the fact that when we get tangled up in arguments about how kids learn and what teachers' benefits should be and all of this, and we criticize however we want from any standpoint, education and how decisions are made and what we're talking about, we need to also be really clear that the main problem is actually economic, right? I mean, like in Florida, it's a pretty good example, but in states all over the country, your school is only just as good as the people who live in the community in terms of how it's funded. It really has so much more to do with the economics, the socioeconomics, but specifically the economics, than it does all these other things that we can and should talk about, right?
Yeah, if we're going to talk about what high-stakes testing does, the one thing high-stakes testing does really well is identify where poverty is in America. Right? And where poor kids live, that's what testing identifies over and over and over again. That's been shown to be the case. What we can't tell from testing is how you solve that equation, right? Because at the end of the day, we have to invest based on the economics of a community. We all know that education is the great equalizer. Our founding fathers figured that out, right? They knew it was important to have a high quality public education system. The Florida Constitution, for example, as many state constitutions do, has a requirement for a high quality, uniform public education, because everyone knows that it's through education that you lift up people out of poverty, that you give them that shot at really making it in society. And when people who have grown up, my wife grew up in poverty, when people talk about how they got out of poverty, they always talk about their public schools. But I'll even go further. I'm a teacher, of course, but when I talk about my childhood, I talk about public schools. Who doesn't? When you think of schools are where childhood happens. Let's face it, schools are where childhood happens, because every person, when you think back to your childhood, you think about your schools. You think about learning, yes, but you think more about your teachers, right? When you talk about school, Pete, you think back to when you were in school. You might talk about your mom who was a teacher, right? But you're going to talk about the teachers you had. You're going to talk about things you did. You're going to talk about experiences you had. You don't talk about the math book. You don't remember the math book you had in elementary school, right? You don't talk about, all of the stuff you may have learned. It built up over time, but you talk about the teachers who impacted you most. You talk about the relationships you had with your friends on the playground. And you talk about how you were able to interact with teachers and staff and students, your classmates. That's what we talk about. Recently got together, not so recently now, almost a year ago, but during COVID, everything seems recent. Yeah. But it was my 30th, and it was my 30th year since class reunion.
High school, yeah.
30 years. I couldn't believe it. None of us could.
Yeah, mine's coming up.
You know what we were talking about? The things we did, the stupid things we did in high school, right? We talked about the teachers. We none of us sat there and said, hey, do you remember learning the quadratic equation? Right? No one does that. Like, maybe it was, look, some of this stuff is important. It's all important. But what we miss in the learning process is it's not just about building knowledge. We build that knowledge through the learning process, but it's also about the relationships. And that's what drives our public schools. And it's about those opportunities that we have because of experiences that you have while you're in school.
Well, opportunity is the word. I mean, that's the word. You have to have an opportunity to get a quality education. The argument in America has in recent years been about privatizing education and creating charter schools and using vouchers. And you've got all kinds of data and opinions and thoughts about that. But before I get into that, if we even have time, I want to be specific and talk with you about what has happened in the last year, generally and broadly for teachers in schools across the country, but of course in your state of Florida. But one thing I've obviously noticed is the attack on teachers over the argument about whether or not kids should go back in school. You've been in an interesting situation in Florida in that you've never really closed, and we can talk about that. But I've been really troubled, as always, to see the attack and the criticism on teachers. And my argument has been teachers are parents too. Teachers have kids. And I don't know any teachers, and I talk to a lot of teachers, that like teaching remotely. I mean, there's things we've learned because of COVID, but what we do know is teachers do not like teaching kids remotely, overwhelmingly so. They have kids. Why are we demonizing them? This is an important and complicated discussion about remote and in school and class sizes and safety. But what do you say about the attack on teachers as a consequence of the way that they're teaching remotely?
So there's a couple of things I think we need to talk about that we've learned during COVID. First of all, I don't want to miss this. You had mentioned opportunity. Sometimes when they privatize schools, they talk about, opportunity scholarships is another way for vouchers, or they talk about access to high quality learning. Here's the thing. Kids don't need access to high quality learning. They need the education they deserve, right? This should not be about giving kids access. This should be actually about stepping up and giving kids the education they deserve. What have we learned during COVID? The best place for kids to get that education is in the public school building. That's where it is. We learned, it was interesting because in Florida, there was this big push to go virtual. I mean, we literally have laws on the book in Florida that say in high school, you have to have 2 virtual classes because they really were pushing this idea. They dramatically expanded the number of slots for the Florida virtual school. School districts created virtual programs. Does virtual education have a place? Yes. Is it the end all and be all? Hell no. Right? We learned that during COVID, that this online virtual distance learning concept does not work for most kids in an effective way in which they're getting the learning they do. Them being in school does. So now let's get into what happened. So schools across the country shut down last March, almost a year ago, right? It was in Florida, it was March 13th. Was the last day of the legislative session last year, and for Florida, and the schools were going on spring break, and they were all told, go on spring break and don't come back. And we did not reopen until August in Florida. And I don't think any states did, right, until some of them started this summer reopening. And then there's been this argument. How do we reopen? How do we reopen safely? In Florida, we did some crazy things. We reopened campuses regardless of what was going on with COVID. In many cases, without real safety protocols. Some districts required masks, some did not. We talked about social distancing, but early on in the process, as people were coming back, schools were able to socially distance, but not as it went on. And here's what we learned in reopening here in Florida. We learned that schools did not become the super spreaders everyone was afraid they were going to be. It's a reality. It's true. But there was COVID in our schools. And we lost over 40 educators in the state of Florida to COVID since the start of the school year.
And I just want to jump in there. Nobody knew what the hell was happening. It's not you take precautions. This idea of scoring points, like we were right. If you just would have stayed in school and no, that's not what you do. Educated people use science and research, and when you get the data, then you make the right decisions. But we didn't know. We really didn't. People made the best assumption. I just want to jump in there and say, come on.
Listen, and I agree, Pete. I mean, the fact of the matter is, look, we sued in the state of Florida, not necessarily to keep schools closed as it was often couched, but we sued the state because they were dictating to local communities what they needed to do and how to do it. And that was the challenge that we had. You took away the power of parents, of educators, of decision makers in the local community to say, here's what's going on here. And this is how we think we should approach it. There's our governor keeps taking victory laps and saying, oh, we did the right thing by opening. I don't think you could say that safely, right? Like, we literally had over 80,000 cases since the start of the year in our public schools of COVID. We have had hundreds of thousands of kids quarantined at various points in time over the last year. And those kids who are quarantining are losing in education. As I said, we've lost 40 educators have died from COVID. That's bus drivers, teachers, and everyone in between that we've lost to COVID. This is serious. We've had a lot of deaths in Florida on COVID. So I can't sit here and say it was perfect. It worked out great. No one can. And anyone who does is not being honest with the facts, right? But what we also know is that our schools weren't the super spreaders we thought they were going to be, like we saw with some other activities. We do believe college campuses tend to be more of a super spreader kind of event.
You learn that you can't actually get it off surfaces, but nobody knew that. It made total sense to have schools and businesses have disinfectants and pay for them and to spray things down. You learn that kids, didn't get as sick, but these were things we did not know.
Correct. We didn't. And look, and I'm going to say this. What we should never lose sight of is this is not a normal year. We are in the middle of a pandemic. And look, in Florida, here's what we do know. We know the vaccine is a way to address COVID in a very real way, long term. We know that, right? We still don't know ultimately how long the vaccine will last. There's a lot of questions out there on that. What did our governor do who said, everyone get back into school when it came to teachers? He said, I'm not going to prioritize them. In fact, if it wasn't for the Biden administration, the majority of our teachers here in the state of Florida would not have access to the vaccine right now. They have access to the vaccine because the Biden administration said through the National Pharmacy Program, we're going to make vaccines available to teachers. And our governor smartly did not push back on that. But listen, our governor started with seniors for a reason. Yes, he could argue that they were a more vulnerable group, but anyone with health issues was vulnerable, right, to COVID. Sure. We saw that.
Yeah.
But he started with those over 65 because it's a voting block. And he didn't start with those over 65 who tend to be poor. What we found from our governors, there's been several instances where certain people who contributed big dollar amounts to his campaign seem to get a priority in the vaccination process.
Yeah.
And so, look, this whole thing with COVID has been politicized, right? Quite honestly, you could probably argue on both sides of the aisle. We should let science drive it. We should let the medical experts make the recommendations, and then we should follow those recommendations until we know otherwise, till we get more data in. And we really didn't do that in our schools. And so we did have COVID cases, like I said, over 80,000 here in Florida. But at the end of the day, what you see from teachers all over this country, and we saw it here in Florida too, We want our kids to be safe. We want to be safe, and we want our families to be safe. That's not unreasonable. That's not unreasonable at all.
I'll push back on you. Yeah, there's been some folks on the left, liberals and Democrats, politicizing it, but it's certainly not an equivalent. Just simply, the idea that the president of the United States and other Republicans still actually denial that it even was a thing. It's going to go away like a miracle, and that masks don't work or something. Those two things were the most damaging things and most divisive and completely unnecessary. We knew there's a virus. We know that masks work, and only one side has been arguing about that. So your governor, real quick, one more question on him. People talk about, you're obviously there in Tallahassee and always talking to legislators and trying to advocate on behalf of students and educators there in Florida. So DeSantis and previous governors and politics as well as anybody in Florida. They talk about this guy as being the heir apparent to Donald Trump. What else can you tell me about your governor while I've got you?
Yeah, I think he is the heir apparent to Donald Trump. And, look, we had a few weeks ago.
He went to Harvard. I mean, he's a pretty, at least well-educated guy. But
look, when he started reacting to COVID initially, right, he started doing some things and his numbers were going up. He was very quick to respond in Florida to COVID. Then when the president started disputing, saying, oh, it's not a big deal, it's not a big deal, he went the other direction and his numbers plummeted. And his numbers have rebounded. And I think they've rebounded for a couple of reasons, right? I mean, he's polling pretty well right now, but it's for a couple of reasons, right? One is the fact that people have COVID fatigue. You hear about doctors talking about this. You hear about policy folks talking about it. There is COVID fatigue. People are tired of dealing with COVID. And, he's advertised that Florida is open. I do find it interesting that the very people who said COVID was not real were among the first people to get the vaccination. So there's that element there that is kind of interesting. Yeah. And they were the ones who were put in line first to get the vaccination in some cases. But I will say this: we had CPAC meet in Florida, the conservative group, a few weeks ago. The former president was there, and our governor was there. And you heard the former president lifted up our governor. The governor was one of the keynote speakers. So clearly he's trying to line himself up to run for president in 2024. And I think he will. He still has to run for re-election as governor in 2022. And right now, unfortunately, I don't see any Democrats coming out that are positioned in a way that they could really challenge him. And Florida, we have to acknowledge, voted by a wide margin for the former president, who lives in Florida now. I mean, we got him here in the state, which makes for interesting politics. But it was by greater than 2%, and Florida has always been less than 1%. When Governor DeSantis was elected, it was by an extremely razor thin margin in which he won, under 0.5% or right around 0.5% by which he won. So when we had the presidential election, and you saw the former president win Florida by greater than 2%, it's kind of concerning to me in my thinking of how we should operate here in Florida.
What do you think, we touched on this, but what do you think the pandemic, COVID-19, revealed about public education in America, or more specifically in your state?
Here's what we know about public schools. And you ask any educator this, any teacher, anyone who works in public schools, ask your mom, she will tell you, our public schools are the best place for kids to learn. Our public schools are essential to our families. They bring families together. I mean, think about how many times you go and see your girls at a program at school. You see neighbors, you talk to them, you interact. We do that more probably in schools than anywhere else, and that's been missing right now, right? And our public schools are essential for the economic well-being of every family and every community. That's what we know about our public schools now.
For the simple fact, by the way, I just thought of one detail that people sometimes miss. That when your kid, if you want to criticize public schools all day, fine. I mean, not fine, but when your kid goes off to school, you can go to work. If your kid doesn't go to school, you can't go to work. I mean, I think that's one thing that you're pointing to about how important they are for parents to be able to make a living. I mean, that's why they call this the what is this the female unemployment recession? What is the she session? Because women have ended up having to leave their jobs to stay home with the kids. It's a screwed up situation in America that's the case. But I just wanted to add that caveat or specific point about public schools.
Yeah, look, and you know, and in some cases people see that and they think, oh, so our public schools, you know, that's where kids go. It's a babysitting kind of service. It's not. It's so much more than that, as we talked earlier in the show. And we should recognize that our teachers and the people who work in our public school have done amazing work. Think about this, especially here in Florida, and this is happening everywhere now, right? Our public schools transformed learning last March when COVID hit. They're transforming it again, or transformed it again as we reopen schools, because it's still not normal. And that's the part we should always remember. Had it not been for the teachers and staff and administrators in our schools, learning would not have continued during this pandemic. And while it's not been ideal, and while we absolutely have disruptions that we have to address going forward, that's what we should be focused on, by the way, right? Like, we should be focused on what are we doing as we come out of this pandemic and move forward to make sure our kids are getting everything they deserve and need, both academically and social and emotionally, because they need that both, right? They need those things. They need those connections. And that's important. And look, every parent, you, me, every parent out there, we want one thing for our kids. We want our kids to be happy and excited about learning. We want them to love school. We want them to be lifelong learners so that they can continue to grow. Every parent wants that. And our public schools are the best place that happens.
Don't speak for me. I want my daughter to watch Grey's Anatomy during fourth period. That's what she did today. During class and math, where she's struggling. I can't believe I'm throwing her under the bus. But Julia, I mean, that's crazy. I mean, I know she's not alone. I mean, it's crazy what they are able to do, what they're dealing with, what they're missing out on, just to put a finer point on that. Absolutely. That's exactly what we want. And we've learned more now. I mean, in this conversation with you, it makes me want to reach out to all of my daughter's teachers and say, thank you for putting up with this bullshit. I mean, I can't imagine. It's so hard to go to be in front of the kids, literally stand there and try to keep their attention, period. To do it on screens, it's just, my heart goes out to every educator listening. So.
This idea of going after teachers is what's happening in Florida. We have some lawmakers who are literally going after teachers' freedoms to advocate for their students. They want to shut down their ability to come together and advocate for their students through their union. That's how they do it, right? Like, you come together. We're the United States of America. I don't know why people always forget that, but you come together when you have a common cause in a union. And that's what our educators do. And we have some lawmakers who are, last year they called it in Florida the year of the teacher. And so what we're saying, what is this, the year to go after the teacher? Because that's what it seems like with some of our lawmakers here in Florida. And it's crazy, because what we should be doing is investing in our teachers, addressing the teacher shortages, addressing what they need to help kids. That's the focus right now. But some aren't doing that.
And the teacher shortage in Florida, we talked about that before, has a lot to do with the fact that it's just not a great place to be a teacher, from pay to benefits to overall treatment, right? I mean, we don't have a teacher shortage in my area in New York State. I mean, we have competition for jobs here, right? I mean, do I have that right?
Maybe. I'm not sure if New York is still, most of the country now is starting to deal with a teacher shortage, which is just taking its toll. We actually had the University of South Florida, the largest college of education at a university in Florida, threatened to close their college of education because they don't have enough students enrolled to become teachers.
We should talk about that issue another time and try to get to the root of it. Yeah. But before I let you go, and I know you have to get back to much more important work. You're there in Florida, in the capital, at Tallahassee, and it's the only building in Florida that's not open. And that's fascinating. If you are going to testify, you have to go to a different building. You're not allowed to go into the state capitol, and that's the only building in Florida that you can't go into. Is that right?
Yeah. So, the Florida legislature is closed because of COVID protocols, but everywhere else in Florida is open, from the beaches to the schoolhouses to the restaurants to the hotels. Everything's open, but not the Capitol. And the Capitol is where the governor works. The Capitol is where the legislature works. And I will just say this. The Senate is tighter on their rules than the Florida House. The Florida Senate, you cannot get in at all. The Florida House, you can get in if you have an appointment. They come down, they let you in, they bring you up to their office, and then you have to leave right after that. Testifying before the committee in the Senate, you go literally 2 blocks down the road to the convention center, essentially. what they call the Civic Center, and you go down there and you testify in a room. We had 100 teachers up last week to testify against taking away their freedom. And they at first weren't even letting them in to testify. So here you are, open government and all, and they're closing it out. By the way, they're still having fundraisers for their political campaigns. Not right now because they can't do it during session, but before session, they were still having fundraisers at the restaurants across the street here from our building. But they're not letting people into the Capitol. And they're saying it's because of COVID, and they've got to have those COVID protocols. But it makes you wonder because it's in the middle of session and they're doing the people's work, but they're not letting people in.
The Florida legislative session is 60 days, only 60 days, March 2nd to April 30th. So you're trying to fit in all of your arguments and issues that you're fighting for in this short period of time. Is that right?
Yeah. Can I say, though, honestly, it's good that it's short because they're not doing a lot of stuff to help us all the time.
Right.
So,
right. Okay.
It sometimes
they
keeps
do less damage.
Some things, but no. As an aside, it is it's a high-paced process, a very fast process, and often, unfortunately, allows things to be rammed through. And so that's what we got to look out for, and that's what we try to stay on top of all the time.
All right. Well, good luck with stopping that Senate bill. Did we explain what it was? Did you kind of touch on it?
Yeah, I did. It's a Senate bill that essentially takes away the rights of teachers. It limits how they join their union and increases their paperwork. And it's all about getting in the way of their individual freedom to belong to their union and their constitutional right here in Florida.
Oh, God. I get depressed and I get worried all the time about organized labor, unions, especially teachers. And then, honestly, I mean this, like, I feel better knowing that you're there. You're just one of the smartest, most passionate guys. The only thing I worry about is that you get enough time with your family, because it seems like you work harder than anybody I know to help everybody else. And I'm always like, I hope Andrew's helping himself, too, because we need you to have that energy and enthusiasm forever. Never die, Andrew Spar. Live forever. Long live the Spar.
I will tell you this, Pete. My youngest daughter, just before you called, I was FaceTiming with her because she got braces today. So she has her braces on. Just got them today. So the fun adventures of parenting, right?
Exciting milestone, yeah. Enjoy the orthodontist visits. President Andrew Spar, always a pleasure and an honor. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. And Pete, you really need a jingle for the news dump, I'm just going to say.
Well, you can criticize or you can submit. Can you rhyme? I look forward to the Andrew Spar news dump jingle. Thank you, buddy. I love that you're listening. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yes, I should have mentioned that Andrew is a major supporter of mine, always has been, and a subscriber to the show. He's joined us in some of the Zoom hangouts as well. Love Andrew Spar, love talking to him, always a great guest, as well as Lizz Winstead. Lizz Winstead, Andrew Spar, and you. Thank you for tuning in, for listening. Tuning in. Do you tune into a podcast? You don't tune a knob for booting up, for downloading, for subscribing. I don't know. If you aren't a paid subscriber, what's going on? Email me and tell me why you aren't. standupwithpete@gmail.com. Otherwise, enough with the nonsense. Let's do this. Sign up right now at the paid subscription link in the show notes and become a member of our community if you'd like. And you can join us for our weekly hangouts and the Discord chat, which is always going on. Great network of amazing people. We would love to have you. That's it for me. You're not alone. We're out there together, enjoying, struggling, and hopefully at times triumphing on this journey of life. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Love you. Bye-bye. Take it away, John Carroll.
Stand up. Let the brave meet the challenge. Let the weak flee. Oh, you better stand up. Stand up. When you're tired of begging, saying pretty please, that's the time you gotta finally get up off of your knees. When you can't see the forest for the burning trees, you got to stand up. Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up. Stand up. I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. You got to let him off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up. Got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up. People got the power. Stand up. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Stand up.
Hello, hashtag show enders. Here now, one of my favorite comedians, Jim Jeffries, from his Netflix special, Bear, a long bit, a hilarious bit on gun control.
Now, before I start saying this, I want to say this, right? I believe in your right as Americans to have guns. I'm not trying to stop you from having guns. All I'm saying is this is my personal belief on the opinion. My opinion on the... it doesn't matter. I don't like guns, right? I'm going to say some things that are just facts, right? In Australia, we had guns, right? Right up until 1996. And in 1996, Australia had the biggest massacre on earth. Still hasn't been beaten. And... now, after that, they banned the guns. Now, in the 10 years before Port Arthur, there was 10 massacres. Since the gun ban in 1996, there hasn't been a single massacre since. I don't know how or why this happened. Maybe it was a coincidence, right? Now, please understand that I understand that Australia and America are two vastly different cultures with different people, right? I get it. In Australia, we had the biggest massacre on earth. The Australian government went, that's it, no more guns. And we all went, yeah, right then, that seems fair enough. Really. Now, in America, you have the Sandy Hook massacre where little tiny children died, and your government went, maybe we'll get rid of the big guns? And 50% of you went, fuck you, don't take my guns! So here's where it gets confusing, right? Now, as I said, I'm all for your Second Amendment rights. I think you should be able to have guns. It's in your Constitution. What I am not for is bullshit arguments and lies. There is one argument and one argument alone for having a gun, and this is the argument. Fuck off. I like guns. It's not the best argument, but it's all you've got. And there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with saying, I like something, don't take it away from me. But don't give me this other bullshit. The main one is, I need it for protection. I need to protect me, I need to protect my family. Really? Is that why they're called assault rifles? Is it? Never heard of these fucking protection rifles you speak of? Protection? What the fuck are you talking about? You have a gun in your house, you're 80% more likely to use that gun on yourself than to shoot someone else. And people think, well, that'd never happen to me. You don't know that, because you know what? From time to time, we all get sad. One day you're happy, then you're sad, and then... it was... Protection? I had a break-in in Manchester, England, where I was tied up, I had my head cut, they threatened to rape my girlfriend, they came through the window with a machete and a hammer, and Americans always go, well, imagine if you had a gun. And I'm like, all right. I was naked at the time. I wasn't wearing my holster. I wasn't staring at the window waiting for cunts with machetes to come through. Like, what world do you live in where you're constantly fucking ready? You have guns because you like guns. That's why you go to gun conventions. That's why you read gun magazines. None of you give a shit about home security. None of you go to home security conventions. None of you read Padlock Monthly. None of you have a Facebook picture of you behind a secure door going, fucking yeah. Like, you're going to be ready if someone comes into your house. You have it at all fucking time. By the way, most people who are breaking into your house just want your fucking TV. You think that people are coming to murder your family? How many fucking enemies do you have? Geez, you think a lot of yourself if you think everyone's coming to murder you. See, if you have it readily available, it becomes unsafe. You have it in your bedside table, one of your kids picks it up, thinks it's a toy, shoots another one of your kids. Happens every fucking day. But people go, that would never happen in my house, because I'm a responsible gun owner. I keep my guns locked in a safe. Then there's no fucking protection! Someone comes into the house, you're like, wait there, fuckface. Oh, you've come to the wrong house here, buddy boy. I'll tell you what, I'm gonna fuck you up. Okay. Is it 32 to the left or 32 to the right? Your mother's birthday? Why the fuck would I know your fucking mother's birthday? Maybe if you didn't leave the window open because it's too hot in here, we wouldn't be getting fucking murdered, right? I find the NRA to be hard work. But the fact that they always think the answer is more guns. After Sandy Hook happened, the NRA said, and I quote, none of this would have happened if the teachers had guns. I think they're forgetting what school was like. Does anyone remember that casual teacher that used to, whenever she came onto school, that relief teacher came, you and your friends would see her and go, oh, we're going to make her cry. And then she'd stand in front of the class with a bit of chalk and her hands would be shaking. And you go, you're never getting married, are you, miss? Never going to happen for you. Then she'd get back to a 1967 Volkswagen Beetle, she'd be crying over the steering wheel, just, why don't they like me? Let's give that cunt a gun and see how things work out. And then they go, oh, well, answer to that, we'll just add more guns. They go, we'll put an armed security guard at every school across America. Yeah, that'll work out. The average security guard in America earns $16 an hour. Not a lot of wiggle room to be a fucking hero. Someone comes onto the school and you've got Kevin. Now, I'm sure Kevin's shit hot at Call of Duty, but it might not fucking cut it, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I understand that when I'm doing this joke in this room, 50% of you agree with me, 50% of you don't agree with me. And I do respect the people who don't agree with me. Don't think I don't. The 50% that don't agree with me, 20% of those people are smart enough to realise this is a comedy show and it's not to be taken seriously, and they're laughing along because it's just funny jokes, right? And then the next 20% are sort of phased out a little bit and looking around going, wonder how they got that chandelier up there. And then there's the last 10%, and they're fucking furious. Right now, in this room, and the people watching at home, 10% of you are fucking seething. And for a couple of reasons. First reason, I'm making good points.
To hear the rest of it, go to YouTube or Netflix and search Jim Jeffries Gun Control. I love you. Goodbye.